We need to move the position forward. We can't just leave it as it is. We'll take control of the bush area and hit them from behind.
What are you talking about? How do you plan to retreat if you go in like that? Do you even know how many troops Aspen has guarding their rear? So, you're saying we should just let that guerrilla unit run wild? Because of that, morale is dropping again.
It was a strategy meeting. Various company commanders and lieutenants gathered around a table in the center, talking. First Company Commander Graham was in favor of attacking. Palto brought up another point. Third Company Commander Rayon was killed by a fairy assassin in the last battle, leaving the position vacant, so the first platoon leader of the Third Company had immediately filled the spot. He had nothing to say and kept his mouth shut. The rest were filled by Marcus's lieutenants. They brought up necessary opinions, confirmed them, and cross-verified. Watching this, the ferry company commander thought it was all pointless. The problem was clear.
There's someone clever on the other side.
And there's no one like that on this side. Battalion Commander Marcus had the nickname Warmonger. Despite the nickname, he wasn't stupid. You could tell from how he handled Enkrid. He knew how to lift the morale of his subordinates. He could adjust morale and set the tone. Compared to the previous battalion commander, this one was an archangel. However, Marcus wasn't a strategist. When Marcus needed to turn the tide and change the atmosphere, what did he do? A brilliant strategy? No, he either took action himself or used a powerful armed group. You could see this from the previous battles. So, what was the sword Marcus drew? He brought out two swords. One was the heavy infantry of the First Company. The other was the Royal Guard Border Patrol. This meant Marcus was a commander who prioritized brute force in his tactics. On the other hand, the enemy.
No matter how you look at it, they're the ones using their brains.
The ferry company commander had lived a long time and was experienced. Usually in these cases, the clumsy response of allies often led them into traps. What if this was just a temptation to lure us in deeper? What if the main force advanced further, only to find a trap waiting? Even if they wanted to gather information, they were in the enemy's backyard. Should they send scouts deeper? Judging by the movements of the enemy's guerrilla unit, it would be a cat-and-mouse chase along the ridges. Ignoring them and attacking the enemy's rear? That might not be a bad idea. If they moved west, they would face the cross guard. If they moved northeast, they would encounter the enemy's main force. The Allies couldn't decide on a direction. If they couldn't figure it out, holding the position was the best they could do. In reality, this unit's mere presence threatened the entire main force. The enemy's tricks could simply be ignored. Marcus slammed his fist on the strategy map spread out on the table. A couple of pieces and pins on the map toppled over.
To put it bluntly, we're saying we can't move forward or retreat as things stand. Right? We need to talk about what we can do.
He was just as frustrated. In a normal situation, the main force should have already hit the enemy's main force and retreated, but the battle was dragging on. Meanwhile, the enemy guerrilla unit kept poking at them, which was really annoying, so they tried to come up with a plan to catch them, but everyone was just talking nonsense. In the end, the strategy meeting ended inconclusively. There were no useful opinions. As the meeting ended and the ferry company commander returned to her tent, a platoon leader with bizarre armaments and swords on both sides of his waist blocked her path. Pressing down on the swords with his left hand, he bowed his head. After the salute, platoon leader Enkrid spoke.
Requesting permission to present a tactical suggestion and request temporary command.
The ferry commander, staring at Enkrid, thought he had a rather handsome face and wondered what his suggestion was. To her, Enkrid didn't seem like the type to strategize. He was more of a straightforward fighter.
If you've come to propose an engagement, this isn't the right time, platoon leader.
The ferry commander made a joke in her own way, casually. Enkrid, seemingly used to such jokes by now, responded just as casually.
This is about military strategy.
Could they ignore the opinion of a mere platoon leader? No, they couldn't. Setting aside her personal liking for him, Enkrid had been proving himself on every battlefield.
Speak.
Enkrid, not wanting to take credit for someone else's idea, kept it brief.
Grant me a temporary command to disrupt the enemy lines.
And?
I request the support of one soldier skilled in pathfinding.
Is that all?
Additionally, how about the main force moving westward now?
The ferry commander tilted her head to the side. Enkrid explained, as he had heard it. Where was this unit currently positioned? What impact would their movements have on the enemy? What effect would that impact bring about? It was a matter of observation and prediction.
What if things don't go as expected?
Then we retreat.
In that case, they would retreat. In fact, this plan was focused on retreating from the start. The ferry company commander was not a fool. As she listened, her mind started working rapidly.
That's useful.
No, it wasn't just useful. It seemed like the best option in the current situation. They weren't doing anything significant, but what would happen if these small actions accumulated? With a bit of luck, and if Enkrid moved with his platoon members directly,
Is this your plan?
the ferry commander asked.
No.
Enkrid shook his head. He had no intention of taking credit for another soldier's merits.
This was the idea of a soldier named Kreis.
Kreis had suggested it, not wanting to risk their current position. It was a casual suggestion, hoping it would be considered, and if not, the command would have some other plan in mind. But as it turned out, this was the most needed idea at the moment.
Good.
The ferry company commander left it at that and swiftly turned away, heading toward the battalion commander's tent, where the strategy meeting had been held just a while ago. Soon after, the Allied forces began to move differently. They started preparing to vacate the position and march. Meanwhile, Enkrid was arming his platoon members and addressing them. There was no need for a speech, as they weren't the kind to require one for a mission.
Rem,
Yes?
shall we go catch that archer?
Enkrid asked Rem simply. Rem's eyebrow twitched. It was a sign of satisfaction.
Sounds good.
Rem's smile seemed to carry a scent of blood.
I'm just suggesting we warm up a bit. Anyone want to sit this one out?
He looked at each of them. Ragna, Audin, Jackson, Andrew, and Mac. Although he was willing to let anyone opt out, there were no such volunteers. Then there was.
This is Finn, who joined the platoon today.
Nice to meet you.
Finn's inclusion was another development. After requesting support, they had sent over a ranger who used to be with the light armored archery unit. Now that the archery unit had been integrated back into the second company, Finn's position became somewhat ambiguous. Thus, she ended up joining the platoon as a squad leader. It was an odd setup, considering there were less than 10 people in this independent platoon, yet it had 2 squad leaders. It was a peculiar situation, but what could they do? The crazy platoon was always like this. Finn had transferred because of Enkrid. He was someone Finn wanted to observe closely, even if it meant lowering her rank to squad leader. She also had a personal interest in getting to know Enkrid better. Additionally, there were people she wanted to meet.
I'm Finn. I don't intend to throw my weight around as a squad leader, so let's just get along. So you're Audin, right?
Finn was straightforward. She said what she wanted and acted as she pleased. She then revealed one of her intentions. Audin, the one who taught Enkrid the Valaf-style martial arts. Finn licked her lips as she looked at Audin. She was intrigued just by his physique.
Enki is great, but...
Audin seemed promising too. Was he all form and no substance? She had already confirmed Enkrid's substance during their first meeting by the stream. It was unforgettable, especially below the abs.
Well,
Finn set aside her thoughts. This wasn't the time for such musings.
Yes, sister. I was given the name Audin by the Lord.
They shook hands and greeted each other. Rem, Ragna, and Jackson acted nonchalantly. Andrew approached and mentioned they were both squad leaders. Mac just nodded in acknowledgement. This was the group.
All right, let's start with the operation overview.
Enkrid spoke, looking at Kreis. It's your turn now, isn't it? Understanding the look, Kreis cleared his throat and stepped forward.
Since the enemy's guerrilla unit is causing trouble, we're going to do something similar.
Kreis knew that if he spoke too complicatedly, no one would understand, so he kept his explanation as simple and clear as possible. The gist was this: the enemy was using the terrain to disrupt their forces, so why couldn't they do the same? While a part of the border patrol had already done something similar, Kreis felt it hadn't left a strong enough impression on the enemy. So, what should they do? Make it unforgettable for them.
Shall we go then?
Did Kreis's voice sound lackluster? Rem chuckled and spoke.
That's not how you go into battle. You sweep them all away.
Rem spoke to Kreis, raising his voice at the end, of course. Only Enkrid responded.
Sounds good.
The others ignored it. Jackson started walking as soon as Rem opened his mouth.
Are you coming?
He even asked Finn. Finn observed the hostility among the platoon members and wondered what was going on, but she did her job. There had been a warning, after all.
This isn't a normal unit. Are you okay with that?
Hadn't the ferry company commander already warned her? Finn nodded. Her main interest was in Enkrid and Auden. The other members she could just get along with. And so Enkrid's platoon moved out. Finn found the path. Following the enemy's traces would just lead them in circles. So they set a different target, not the guerrilla unit but the enemy's main force. Finding them wasn't difficult.
Whew! If there are knights, won't that be a big deal?
Andrew spoke, and Kreis, who had the worst combat skills in the platoon, responded. They all walked steadily, ignoring any traces they left behind.
I don't think so. How can Cube be so sure? If there were, we could just gauge the situation and run away. Also, if they had the resources to disperse knights or other units to the rear, they wouldn't be operating a guerrilla unit. In my opinion, that guerrilla unit is a distraction. Because, well, that's enough.
Andrew saw that Kreis tended to go on when it came to these topics. If only half of what he said made sense, what was the point? Kreis was a bit dissatisfied with that. It seemed like no one was willing to listen. However, the platoon leader at least listened carefully and showed a sincere attitude. That was satisfying enough. In reality, Kreis felt a bit anxious about what he was saying. As he walked quickly to the platoon leader's side, Kreis spoke.
Captain, I think that guerrilla unit is just a distraction. So why would they distract us? It's simple. They want us to stay put to keep us from moving elsewhere. If we head to the rear, they'll lay traps. It's something like that. So we should move differently, in a way they don't expect.
Kreis continued with his strategy. Enkrid listened carefully and then asked,
Why are you repeating this?
He had already heard this. This was the third time.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say it. Never mind.
Was he nervous?
Does talking make your anxiety go away?
Well, Captain, you wouldn't understand.
Kreis thought of himself as an ordinary person, so he believed someone like Enkrid wouldn't understand him. To him, the platoon leader seemed abnormal. If you lack talent, you should give up. Chasing dreams, how could that be normal? It's a literal dream, not a feasible goal. Yet, Enkrid pursued it, repeating the same things every day. He constantly showed what bone-grinding training was in front of Kreis. How could that be normal? Kreis stopped talking. When he looked at the platoon leader, he felt like they could overcome anything, no matter what happened. His anxiety eased a little.
This way.
Finn, a skilled ranger and pathfinder, led the way. Even though she wasn't familiar with the terrain, she was good at finding traces. The enemy's guerrilla unit had set up various traps to avoid pursuit. They saw a few of these traps. It was said that parts of the border patrol had encountered these traps several times while chasing the guerrilla unit. The Madman platoon didn't deliberately look for the guerrilla unit's traces. They went straight ahead. They moved directly toward the enemy's rear. After passing through the bushes and ridges, they began to see the enemy's rear guard.
I'll go first. No, if anyone goes before me, I'll smash the back of their heads, so I'm warning you all to back off.
Rem growled. They let him. No one seemed interested in taking the lead. Kreis surveyed the enemy's formation. The enemy was spread out across a wide terrain from the tall grass to where they stood. So this would be the rear, specifically the rear right side of the enemy, right? It should be around that area. They had spent more than half a day crossing the ridges.
Are there any knights?
Enkrid asked. Jackson, who had sharp eyes, looked around and responded.
I don't see anyone particularly dangerous.
It was time to begin. Rem started moving down the ridge, and Enkrid followed him. As they descended, dust rose around them. Mac, Andrew, Finn, Auden, and Jackson remained behind. Kreis was under protection, and they were prepared in case something went wrong. Only Rem, Enkrid, and Ragna had descended.
We'll watch,
Ragna said as he joined Enkrid. What had he learned while wielding two swords? Ragna wanted to see if what he had taught was effective.
A test.
For Enkrid, it was also an experiment. Two swords, dual-wielding, fighting with a weapon in each hand. How effective would it be?
What's this?
A guard spotted the three approaching. Kicking the gentle slope as they descended, they stirred up dust, and there was no terrain to hide behind. They had descended onto a fertile plain, land that the victor of the battle would soon claim. Rem approached, waving his hand. It was a gesture and walk that seemed aimed at an old friend.
Hey,
The guard looked puzzled by his nonchalance. Are they the enemy, or not? As the distance closed, the guard was about to tell them to stop when Rem's hand axe flew from his belt. His hand moved like lightning. The throwing axe arched through the air, drawing a long trajectory. The guard's head was adorned with a new ornament, one that ended his life. The guard with the axe embedded in his head staggered, his feet leaving the ground, as he flailed and fell backward with a thud. The other guard, witnessing this, hurriedly brought a whistle to his mouth. However, Rem was already upon him. He charged with explosive force, using his powerful thigh muscles. Enkrid knew Rem's skills. Even so, he was surprised. It reminded him of the charge he had seen from a squire just before they became a full knight.
Rem.
He still had hidden skills. Rem closed the distance and grabbed the guard's wrist, twisting it. Then the axe in Rem's left hand sliced horizontally through the air. The guard fell sideways, his neck half severed. Blood gushed from the fallen man's neck, soaking the ground.
Pathetically weak.
Rem muttered between the two dead soldiers. Rem, having killed the guards, turned around. Enkrid and Ragna didn't even have a chance to step in. They wouldn't wait for the enemy here, anyway.
That was easy.
Rem said as he spun his axe in his hand, blood droplets falling to the ground. Seeing this, Enkrid turned his body.
Ragna.
At the call, Ragna quickly followed his platoon leader. This was something Kreis had repeatedly emphasized. Never leave Ragna alone. It was a precaution because Ragna would undoubtedly get lost.
Hey, barbarian, take it easy.
Following behind the platoon leader, Ragna threw out a remark. From Ragna's perspective, it looked like Enkrid was trying to step in but hadn't had the chance. Not knowing when to engage and when to withdraw, the barbarian was bound to get scolded. Of course, Rem didn't quietly agree.
Huh? What did you say? Do you want another mouth on your neck? Want me to slit your throat?
Enough.
Enkrid calmly intervened between them. It was just the beginning, after all. They climbed back up the ridgeline. It should have been several times harder than coming down, but compared to what they'd been through with the isolation technique, it felt like child's play. This was the same for Rem and Ragna as well. None of the crazed platoon members wielding axes and swords would be short on stamina.
All right, Finn, let's go.
Kreis spoke as if it wasn't the time to fight, urging them forward. Finn nodded and started moving. They climbed over the ridgeline again. Finn led the way, followed by Enkrid, and then Ragna and Kreis trailed behind. Even Kreis, who was relatively strong, didn't lag behind. Mac observed their movements, inwardly surprised.
They're fast.
Their steps were confident and unhesitant. It seemed like a forced march, ignoring the loss of stamina, but none of them looked exhausted. Mac decided it was best to focus on his own pace.
Breathe slowly and deeply.
This march, or was it an ambush, strike mission? Whatever it wasn't going to end quickly. They needed to conserve their strength. Mac spoke, and Andrew nodded.
I know.
A short response came back, indicating he understood without needing further explanation. Mac felt a sense of nostalgia. When had he grown up like this? When this battle was over and they returned to the city, perhaps it was time to find his place.
I'm looking forward to it.
Andrew spoke, his gaze fixed on his platoon leader's back. Mac nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, so that Andrew wouldn't notice. He, too, was looking forward to it. How far would that platoon leader go? Would he truly grasp that something he dreamed of? Mac had ears and a sense of awareness. What the platoon leader desired was something beyond his current reach. Andrew's dream also seemed out of reach, possibly unattainable. He was here to support him, but whether Andrew could revive his family was uncertain.
There's no giving up.
Andrew muttered to himself. The boy who once was just a brat, confident in his abilities and full of bravado, was no longer there. Now there was only a changed man, looking at the back of his platoon leader.
There's no such thing as giving up.
Mac replied with a tone of pride. Though perhaps it wasn't Enkrid's intention, Andrew had changed, and that change had also affected Mac. Reviving his family was something Andrew would now accept as achievable. Mac began to walk, organizing in his mind what needed to be done once they returned. He moved, taking slow, deep breaths, minimizing unnecessary movements. Andrew walked beside him, adjusting his breathing similarly. As Mac and Andrew whispered, Enkrid walked, listening to his platoon's breathing.
You keep listening and listening.
Just as visual focus develops peripheral vision, auditory focus develops by distinguishing and processing sounds, the sound of pebbles scattering, the steps on the ridgeline, and the breathing of the platoon members.
Shallow and steady.
That was Mac and Andrew. Both were preparing for the future. And Rem, his breathing was rough without rhythm. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, it was hard to discern. It suited his personality perfectly. Odin's breathing was so long it was hard to tell when it began and ended. Ragnar's was ordinary, Jackson was silent, and what about his own? If there was any similarity, it was most like Ragnar's. Ordinary, he could breathe normally and move with practiced steps without issue.
I've been curious for a while. Did you get ranger training somewhere?
Finn asked, glancing back. Enkrid replied casually as usual.
I learned by watching a ranger I knew.
It wasn't untrue he had learned by watching Finn, but somehow it felt like they'd had this conversation before. With a similar answer, it reminded him of Enri. When asked about the planes, he had given a similar response. He wondered if that friend had returned safely to the city. They had joined a unit transporting captured soldiers, so there shouldn't be any trouble. Even while pondering, Enkrid didn't stop what he was doing. Listening, observing, feeling, he trained his senses, walking. The ridgeline stretched out ahead, with the enemy on the right and their own camp on the left. By now, their camp should be moving too. Enkrid focused on the task at hand. Continuing his training, he suddenly asked Rem a question.
What was that charge earlier?
If you're asking how I did it, I almost want to smack you on the back of the head.
Rem replied, sounding somewhat indifferent and clearly irritated. Why? Enkrid soon understood the reason.
I asked without thinking.
He had asked reflexively because he expected an answer to come. Perhaps it was a habit from issuing commands recently. People aren't perfect, and Enkrid was no exception. He was fairly skilled in dealing with people, accustomed to advancing alone, and determined to move forward even if it meant crawling.
I lack something I've forgotten to ponder.
People make mistakes. The difference with Enkrid was that he was quick to adapt. He acknowledged his mistakes, recognized them, and corrected them. Enkrid started walking without responding to Rem's comment, retreating into his own world. It meant he should have known the answer without asking. The answer was already in what he had learned. What is needed for a sprint, a charge? Strength, muscle, thigh muscles. It's the heart of the beast. What happens when you add strength to all your muscles and burst forward? Of course, training and time for conditioning are needed, but the path is visible, which brings joy. Ah, so this is it. A fleeting smile of delight crossed Enkrid's face, which made Rem chuckle. Why ask about something so obvious? That was the meaning behind his smile. With Finn leading, they walked diligently. As they walked, Finn was repeatedly surprised. They were all like monsters. No one lagged behind. Is this easy? No, it isn't easy at all. And they haven't received ranger training, right?
He's different from his gentle appearance.
The platoon member nicknamed Big Eyes was particularly impressive. Even though he wasn't considered a combatant, he kept up without falling behind. Although, compared to others, he seemed to be following doggedly, relying more on stamina. Even this was impressive. They crossed over the ridgeline, stopping at a patch of short grass.
This looks like the rear.
What's the best part about moving in small numbers? The agility which they utilized fully. It was downhill again. This time, Auden and Jackson followed.
Why?
Rem pouted slightly, but it was originally planned to take turns. In case of trouble, they needed someone to cover their retreat, especially to protect Kreis. As they walked downhill, Enkrid wondered if Esther was watching from somewhere. They had brought her along, but as soon as they started up the mountain path, she had slipped away and disappeared. Maybe she was hunting somewhere. Who knows? It wasn't something he needed to worry about. As Enkrid descended, they encountered an enemy guard. This time, luck wasn't on their side. Beep! As soon as the enemy soldier spotted them, he blew a whistle. It was a quick reaction. Then he pointed the spear in his hand forward and shouted, "Who are you? Stop." Enkrid approached silently. One of the guards brushed his hand against his waist. It seemed he had a knack for throwing knives. A throwing knife was held backward in his hand, ready to be thrown.
See with your eyes.
React with your body. Move your body based on your senses. The key was to increase reaction speed. This was a technique called the sense of evasion. A knife flew towards him. Timing his movement with the knife's approach, Enkrid lowered his stance and rushed forward. It was different from activating focus point and evading. It wasn't about concentration but reaction speed, calmly and unflinchingly. That was the essence, so that was how he did it. He mimicked the stride of a knight charging into battle without activating the heart of the beast. Pounding the ground, the enemy soldier thrust his spear. The tip of the extended spear aimed for his chest. He dodged and deflected it, all in one smooth motion. Enkrid stepped forward with his left foot, twisting his body to avoid the spearhead, and pushed the spear shaft away with his palm. With a solid thud, the spear was shoved aside, throwing the soldier off balance. The soldier's eyes widened in surprise as Enkrid closed in, not slowing his pace. Just as Rem had once demonstrated, Enkrid charged in, knocking the spear aside and closing in on the soldier. The subsequent fight was predictably short. Enkrid pulled out a dagger and stabbed the soldier's neck, then withdrew it. Blood spurted from the gash in the soldier's neck. Enkrid sheathed the dagger, feeling somewhat satisfied.
It works.
It was a technique he had practiced, not something he had repeatedly used in real combat. The sense of evasion was an art that increased the body's coordination. He had learned something from this training. Fundamentally, the body's reaction speed had changed. What result does that bring? Even without focus point, he could move relatively faster than the enemy. This meant gaining the upper hand in both attack and positioning. The fight being short was inevitable. Even if the enemy's skills were poor and Enkrid himself felt like he was just taking his first steps.
It works.
That in itself was a joy. Jackson was pleased with what he saw Enkrid do. Yes, that's how it should be done. It's basic but clean. In less flattering terms, it was the result of brute force training. In a more positive light, it was thanks to his steadfastness. That was the core of this training. Steadfast and steadfast again. Wasn't it a technique that suited Enkrid well? The training to develop the body's coordination in response to senses would only make his reaction speed faster with repetition.
Did he say his dream was to become a knight?
Just because a dream seems far-fetched, it doesn't mean one shouldn't pursue it. It was the same for him. If he had spoken aloud the goals he held close as a child, no one would have refrained from mocking him. His thoughts continued, but Jackson's hands were more diligently doing their job than ever. He had already positioned himself behind an enemy soldier and slit his throat with a dagger. There was no need to make the blood gush like a fountain as Enkrid had.
Gah.
The soldier, with his throat cut, grasped his neck with his right hand while holding his spear with his left. Trying to press on the wound with his hand, it was a futile effort. The major blood vessels in the neck were already severed. With his extensive experience, Jackson had seen countless people die from similar wounds. Blood began to stream between the soldier's fingers. With a quick kick to the knee, he sent the soldier to the ground, where he lay dying like a fish out of water. He had no strength to cry out or blow the whistle.
Let's go.
They had swiftly dealt with 2 guards. The sound of the whistle had caused movement from deeper within the enemy's ranks. It was time to withdraw.
Agreed.
Enkrid, showing satisfaction, responded and turned around. It was time to move through the mountains again. They moved again, walking diligently. Their retreat was as swift as ghosts. All that the advancing Aspen unit could see, responding to the whistle, was the backs of the figures ascending the mountain.
Chase them,
Shouted the furious rear commander of Aspen, and the enemy soldiers quickly pursued Enkrid's group. But how could they catch up to a small elite unit that had already disappeared over the ridgeline? They were faster than their pursuers, and if the enemy also pursued in small numbers, how would they deal with a counterattack? To Kreis, this was the expected outcome. Why wouldn't it be? If the enemy could strike with a small elite force, then so could they. Of course, it would only be meaningful with a squad like their madman platoon.
Quick march.
Enkrid's voice could be heard behind him. Kreis looked at his platoon leader. Did the platoon leader understand his intentions completely? That made him wonder. Enkrid was also accustomed to small-scale operations leading scouting squads. Added to that was the experience accumulated over time. There were days when they crossed through tall grasslands, days when they attacked the Gilpin Guild with their squad members, and there were nights when they fought lycanthropes, wizards, and ambush units. What is the most important thing? What should a commander prioritize?
Awareness.
It starts with knowing. Understanding what you are doing and what will stem from what you are doing now. You can't know everything, and you can't explain everything with words. But there was a sense. It wasn't instinct, but a sense internalized through experience.
Let's go deeper.
Enkrid said. With that, Finn changed direction. She followed the leader's words faithfully. Crace blinked and looked at his platoon leader from the side. What was he thinking? His expression was the same as usual. An unreadable calm. Everyone's pace quickened. They couldn't afford to be caught by the enemy.
Can't we just fight them? If we kill enough, they won't follow.
Rem grumbled, and Enkrid stopped him.
Don't go.
It was almost an order. That in itself was quite surprising. Seeing Rem obeying so readily, how could one not be surprised?
Ragna, just watch the back of the person in front of you. Don't turn your head anywhere else.
Ragna also followed Enkrid's words faithfully. There was no need to say anything to Auden and Jackson just.
You really seem like a commander now, brother.
Auden said this. Was it that their skills had changed, and thus their attitudes changed too?
Really?
Enkrid still responded indifferently. That attitude, those actions, that tone, nothing had changed. That's why they followed. Even Christ felt his heart move first. If even he, who always scrutinized everything, even checking if Krona was involved or not, acted like this. There's no need to mention the other platoon members. Even Jackson, who prided himself on keeping his emotions hidden, couldn't conceal his expressions at times. He showed a mixture of frustration, regret, and pity. Thinking about it made him smile again, even though it wasn't a situation to laugh.
Why does everything feel so stable?
Despite Kreis having considered everything thoroughly before deciding to execute this, what he felt in reality was different. The platoon was more impressive than he had thought. If the enemy had their own hawk's talons or eyes, on this side, they had a crazy platoon. They were a group with excellent mobility and combat power that only knights could hope to counter. That was Kreis's assessment. So, what if they used this group as a guerrilla unit? It would be a lie to say that no aide had ever suggested this idea. The problem was,
Will they listen?
it was good that they fought well, but they were quite a handful. A good sword is valuable, but using it can be challenging. What is needed? A focal point, something to control them. And who would that be? Having seen them up close, Kreis knew the answer. There was a recent event that clearly demonstrated the platoon leader's influence to Kreis.
That sparring session.
If Enkrid, the platoon leader, hadn't appeared on the battlefield, exchanging swords and engaging in that sparring session, the Madmen platoon would have been finished then, and this battlefield would have turned into a mess. At least, that was Kreis's perspective. Enkrid changed everything with just one sparring session. He turned the winds of the battlefield into a tailwind.
As long as there is a focal point.
A mad strike mission that fully utilized their mobility. The Madmen platoon could handle it. Kreis didn't have the expertise to judge their combat skills. From the start, he was clueless about handling swords or weapons, so it was only natural. However, he could gauge what the Madmen platoon could do, based on the facts and realities presented to him. Moreover, knowing them well helped him understand their capabilities. Thus, the first plan he devised was this. If the enemy resorts to arrows, we'll resort to footwork. It wasn't Kreis's intention, but even though he had shared only part of the facts with Enkrid, Enkrid now suggested going deeper in. Was the platoon leader aware of his intentions? He was curious and was about to ask.
Shake them, hit them, and pull back. The enemy's attention will be distracted by our main force's movements, and while that happens, we might encounter the enemy's guerrilla units.
Enkrid spoke first. What did it mean that he was accustomed to small-scale operations? What perspective had Enkrid gained from his experience?
The intention is clear.
Chris's intention. The enemy's intention. The tasks that needed to be done between these intentions. There was something that the Madmen platoon could do, more specifically. So, it had to be done. Would this ultimately affect the course of the war? The battle of the main force?
It doesn't seem likely.
But who knows? Kreis might have a different perspective. With big eyes, a penchant for revealing Krona, and a dream of opening a ladies' salon to play with women until old age, his thought process seemed different.
Is your dream still to open a salon?
Even Enkrid didn't know why he was curious about this. He just wanted to ask. It wasn't intended as a mockery, of course. Who was he to mock someone's dreams?
Yes, why obvious?
A guy like that came up with this strategy? You never know with some people. Anyway, Enkrid's platoon picked up speed. They climbed and climbed over the mountains. Eventually, even Finn was exhausted. Andrew and Mac's breathing became rough. Chryse was being half carried by Auden, who was supporting him. Even Enkrid felt quite fatigued. Finn, as a ranger, said this was an extremely grueling forced march. They moved over ridges, descending onto flatter ground, and now walked across a plain. They had gone entirely behind enemy lines. It was an elite, small-scale operation utilizing the advantage of the terrain. Of course, this was a tactic the enemy's guerrilla units had used first.
Let's go.
Rem, full of energy, moved ahead. Everyone seemed more excited by the harsh schedule, and in truth, so was Enkrid. What follows after a harsh march? Battle. A battle where blood would spill, flesh would be cut, and bones would be exposed.
Go.
Enkrid said as he charged forward. There were many gaps in the enemy's rear. The number of soldiers had increased to 3, but it didn't pose a problem. As soon as they spotted Enkrid and his team, a whistle blew. At the same moment, Jackson lunged to the side. He drew his sword and thrust it in one smooth motion as he stepped forward. One down, he withdrew the sword and thrust again. 2 down. After killing 2, he held his sword vertically in front of him, ready to defend. Watching Jackson's fight, one could think he killed people very easily. 2 enemy soldiers with holes in their necks fell, and after killing 5 or 6 more, Enkrid's unit retreated again. After pretending to descend the ridge, they confirmed the location of the crossbow unit and retreated. They ambushed and annihilated a few pursuing scouting units. As night deepened, they hid deep in the mountains and set up camp to rest. Adequate rest was essential,
It's nice to be close to a stream, but it's a shame we can't light a fire.
Finn said, taking off her boots and shaking off the dirt. It was spring, a warm season often called the season of magic. Although the food situation became a bit rough, they didn't have to worry about shivering in the cold. Even so,
Captain, I prepared for this,
said Rem, a barbarian who hated the cold, as he brought out heated leather. Ragnar lay down and slept wherever he found a spot. Jackson adeptly climbed up and slept on a thick tree branch. They took turns standing watch, excluding Chryse.
But I will keep moving the watch.
Andrew said, who had mostly been protecting Chryse during the fighting. He volunteered with a thoughtful look in his eyes. They agreed. If one has a burden on their mind, they can't perform at their best. There was still danger lurking in this strike operation. That couldn't be ignored. It's best to relieve oneself of mental burdens. Mac did not oppose this either. The next day, when another day had passed, Chryse realized that Enkrid definitely understood his intentions.
Is it now?
This was said after they crossed several mountain passes, confirming the enemy's position again. A trap. Chryse had identified something the enemy had set up. It was a terrain suitable for an ambush and a quick retreat. There, they discovered an enemy supply unit stationed in a flat area nestled between undulating hills. Several supply wagons were visible. If they entered and blocked the rear, there would be no easy way out. There were other factors that confirmed it was a trap. No crossbow units were deployed. They were made to look like tempting prey. Seeing this, Enkrid asked, and Chryse replied,
Yes.
Does the Madman platoon only possess mobility? No. Their strength lies in their ability to strike a heavy blow at the enemy's weak point. With this single battle, they could create chaos in the enemy's mind. In Chryse's eyes, he could see the enemy's reaction. It was prediction and foresight.
Then,
The main force's movements would also become significant.
let's go.
Enkrid steeled himself. No matter how many predictions one makes, the battlefield is like a fiery ball that can go in any direction. If things go wrong, it can consume everything in flames. So is this like running into a fire-carrying straw?
It doesn't seem like it.
The enemy might not know, but Enkrid knew one thing. The enemies underestimated them too much. A soldier who killed a giant, they likely thought that was all there was to them. But that wasn't enough. Enkrid led the charge. As they ran towards the supply wagons nestled between the hills, soldiers clumsily sorting through food and supplies reacted. For a trap to be effective, it needed to be well set. Not by hiding the soldiers, but by showing them while being well prepared. The enemy soldiers appeared. Among them, Enkrid recognized a familiar face.
You.
He remembered this mustached man being with the Greyhound. Enkrid watched him as the enemy soldiers came forward, a spear thrust toward him. Enkrid's hands moved. 2 swift movements of his sword. Ching, thud. Two different sounds. With the sword in his left hand, he deflected the spear, and with the sword in his right, he pierced the enemy soldier's heart.
Frog would be horrified if he saw this.
As Enkrid withdrew his sword, the enemy's gambeson turned red. The blade had pierced the cloth armor made of quilted cotton and wool. Blood and bits of cloth stuck to the blade. There was no need to worry about what was on the blade. There would be more killing to do. Enkrid sheathed the sword in his left hand again. He could draw it again when needed. With that, he stood holding one sword with both hands, his posture, his vigor, his presence. The enemy soldiers hesitated to approach.
Good.
Next to him, Rem excitedly swung his axe. Auden also smiled and drew his club. Jackson didn't make a big show of it, swinging his sword casually at the oncoming enemies. The most attention was on two people, Enkrid and Ragna. Ragna positioned himself next to Enkrid and began swinging his sword with forced despite. The extra swords at his waist, his movements were unhindered. Ragna's sword cut through the air, leaving an ominous trail, a medium sword technique. With a basic downward slash, he split an enemy soldier's head open with a thud. He then swung his drawn sword horizontally, beheading an enemy soldier who had stepped back. Ragna's feet moved swiftly. In a fight between spears and swords, which has the advantage? Naturally, the spear. But Ragna's footwork erased that advantage. As he moved quickly, the lives of enemy soldiers disappeared, one by one. A shadow fell over the faces of the enemies who had set the trap. What is this? With this level of skill, are they just a guerrilla unit? No, isn't this different from what was expected? Is this right? The number of enemy soldiers was over 40, and they weren't incompetent.
Everyone, form up.
In the midst of it all, the mustached man shouted. The attitude of those who had underestimated Enkrid and his group changed. The mustached man stood directly in front of Enkrid.
You bastard.
Enkrid nodded as he looked at the angry man. Since the man acknowledged him, there was no reason not to return the gesture.
Yeah. Have you been well?
The casual and familiar tone made the mustached man's pupils dilate wildly. His eyes were filled with boiling anger. He looked like he was about to attack immediately. Enkrid prepared himself, but the mustached man took a deep breath, calming himself down. As expected, he wasn't dealing with a simple opponent. He didn't let his emotions dictate his actions. Instead of succumbing to anger, he steadied his breath. So,
this makes the test all the more meaningful.
A fight with two swords, would it have meaning against a skilled opponent? Now it was time to find out. The mustached commander of the now less than 20-strong Greyhound squad frowned.
Did they just walk right into this?
He had set a trap, an enticing one at that, but he didn't expect them to fall for it so easily. Instead, he planned to use this trap to his advantage. The idea was to scatter similar traps all around. If they couldn't tell what was real and what was fake, what would they do? They wouldn't dare to attack recklessly. That would mean half the battle was won.
If that happens, they'll retreat. They won't attack recklessly,
said a soldier from the command who had a favorable view of him. The independent Greyhound squad was now a mere shadow of its former self. Defeats in successive battles and the death of Mitch Hurrier had taken their toll. After numerous failures, someone had to take responsibility, and it started with him. The mustached commander needed to disrupt the enemy forces at the rear. He had to limit their movements. He had prepared a lot for this.
It feels like everything's gone to waste before it even started.
The enemy just charged in without hesitation, swords drawn, and after cutting down his men, then and only then did they ask,
"Shall we fight?"
Even without saying a word, their bodies, actions, and attitudes made it abundantly clear.
As expected.
It was a disaster. The Norillia forces, stationed at the rear, had begun to move, which would complicate things for his command. So what to do now? Give up on everything? The death of the Hurrier family's son? That's fine. That family always treated their children as expendable, so where was his path leading? Such thoughts only distracted him from the task at hand. He decided to push the concerns to the back of his mind. The mustached commander steeled himself and drew his sword. In one breathless motion, he drew and raised his sword before him.
If I kill them all, it will be resolved.
The enemy's guerrilla forces had broken through the trap and charged in. Was that a cause for panic? No, it was a reason to welcome them.
First, I'll kill that bastard.
The one who had put a hole in Mitch Hurrier's stomach would be the first to die. Then he would kill the blonde swordsman next to him. After that, the one wielding an axe. He would leave himself some reserves of strength, considering a possible ambush. As he organized his thoughts, he fixed his gaze on the opponent before him. But was this bastard always this formidable? Just by his stance, he could tell something was different. The presence was extraordinary. It was the same one who had stabbed Mitch Hurrier and fled, unmistakable. It was not a face he could easily forget. The one who had barely escaped that day, the guy who survived even the assassin's threat. Was he this formidable back then? It didn't seem like it. Did he improve? Regardless, the fact remained that he needed to be taken down, and the ones behind him were no different. The mustached commander's eyes glinted with determination. Kreis, observing this, felt a creeping unease.
This guy doesn't seem like an ordinary opponent.
Kreis lacked the ability to gauge his opponent's true skill, which fueled his unease. The enemy had set a trap, and Kreis saw through their intentions. He decided to confront and crush it head-on. He believed in his madman platoon's ability to break through with sheer force. However, the unease didn't completely disappear, perhaps due to his nature. He had a habit of anticipating the worst-case scenario. So, what was the outcome? It would likely begin with a fight between the platoon leader and the mustachioed opponent. Kreis's gaze shifted to the two men. It felt as though the air grew heavier. Sunlight filtered between them. Neither moved, standing still with their swords drawn. Dust that had been suspended in the air scattered in the breeze, the figures of the two blurred in Kreis's vision. A sharp metallic sound erupted. Ragnar stood to the side, observing the scene as a spectator.
Not bad.
The mustached opponent's swordsmanship was sharp. It was evident he had learned and practiced it over many years. It was like a well-crafted table, with rough edges smoothed to perfection, an example of fine craftsmanship. That was the impression the opponent gave. In contrast, how was Enkrid? Their platoon leader was rough. Despite having honed his skills countless times, there was still something unfinished about him, like an incomplete vessel. One side was nearly perfected, the other was still a work in progress.
Well, is this some kind of duel of leaders? Seems pretty boring,
muttered a barbarian nearby. Ragnar didn't bother to respond. Surprisingly, Jackson replied instead.
If you're bored, start cleaning up.
He spoke in a calm and collected tone.
So many people standing around me today. It's a good day,
added the simple-minded religious zealot next to him. Except for the mustached commander facing Enkrid, the others had surrounded them with spears. There appeared to be at least 3 times as many enemies, around 50 strong, from a rough estimate. Some of them, hidden in the supply wagon, had also come out, all heavily armed. While they weren't exactly heavy infantry, 3 of them were wearing chainmail. Yet they remained at ease, as if their courage was boundless, or perhaps their nerves were just frayed enough to be hanging by a thread.
Should we start after that ends?
One of the enemy soldiers in chainmail casually spoke, gesturing toward the mustached commander and Enkrid with his thumb. His attitude exuded confidence. This was the same, even though the bodies of those killed by Ragnar's sword lay scattered on the ground. Sure, Kreis replied. It was a given that winning the duel would give them an advantage. As the metallic sounds clashed, Enkrid and the mustached commander continued their intense exchange. Ragnar lost interest in what was happening around him. It didn't matter to him. His eyes were fixed on Enkrid's hands and feet, his sword and movements. When it comes to completion versus incompletion, who has the advantage? The sounds of swords clashing continued to ring out.
Completion does.
That much was obvious. However, even if something is incomplete, if the foundation is different, what does it matter?
It's over.
Ragnar silently concluded. It wasn't just about the difference in skill, their mentalities were worlds apart. A battle that could be won would be lost with such a mindset. Blades, feet, swords, air, dust, heat. Even as these things brushed past him, Enkrid paid them no mind. He neither saw nor felt them. He was entirely focused on his sword.
Ha!
The mustached opponent shouted as he swung his sword down. It was a solid strike, following the basics of the traditional sword technique. Enkrid gripped his sword with both hands, positioning it horizontally while bending his knees. He deflected the force sideways with his sword. Sparks flew as the blades met. The opponent used strength, while Enkrid countered with skill. In the reverse exchange, Enkrid struck powerfully, and the opponent deflected. The opponent's movements were smooth and precise, even more so than Mitch Hurrier's. However, Enkrid's thoughts weren't on Mitch Hurrier. His eyes, ears, hands, and feet were all focused on the act of wielding his sword and fighting, using all his senses, his focus, the heart of a beast, the feel of the blade. He sought to see everything, to draw a line connecting point to point, and to use that line to cut down his opponent. As Enkrid read his opponent's intentions, he deftly blocked and evaded the attacks. After about 10 exchanges of blows, Enkrid faced 2 critical moments. The first was when he almost had his wrist cut, but he deflected the strike using the guard of his sword. The second was when his opponent, after a series of vertical and horizontal slashes, suddenly changed to a thrust aimed at his abdomen. Enkrid barely managed to block it, setting his blade upright to deflect the sharp point to the side. It was a defense so skillful it seemed almost miraculous. A slight miscalculation would have left a new hole in the center of his leather armor. The mustached opponent sneered when his surprise attack missed. It was a clear sign of his intent to kill. Enkrid paid it no mind. After these 2 crises, Enkrid shifted his stance, stepping to the left. The mustached man also adjusted his footwork to prevent Enkrid from gaining a better position. They circled each other, staying within striking distance. During this maneuver, Enkrid intentionally shielded his left hand with his right shoulder. After adjusting his stance, he held his sword in his right hand and moved his left hand toward his waist. The mustached man read Enkrid's intentions. With countless duels and years of experience, he could anticipate what would happen next. Already wary of Enkrid having another sword, he had seen him dual-wield before.
Left hand.
Seeing Enkrid's left hand moving downward, the mustached man swung his sword forcefully. From the upper right to the lower left, a powerful diagonal slash. A decisive strike with his heavy sword, he believed this would secure his victory, but Enkrid didn't draw another sword with his left hand. He only pretended to. Then, after taking a few deep breaths, he delivered a powerful strike.
The heart of the beast.
His heart pounded, sending a surge of blood through his body like an explosion. The rush of blood fueled his muscles with strength. His strength surged to nearly double its usual power. There was no battle cry, only 2 pairs of eyes, veins bulging, locked onto each other. It was a moment where life or death would be decided with one blow. Facing the heavy blade coming towards him, Enkrid swung his sword horizontally with just his right hand. Clang, thud, crunch! 3 loud sounds erupted almost simultaneously. The swords clashed, and both fighters stepped forward, changing their positions.
Was this intentional?
The mustached man asked.
From the beginning.
Enkrid replied. They stood with their backs to each other. The mustached man's blade was clean, without a drop of blood on it. More importantly, it was broken in half. Enkrid's sword was intact, made from a blend of Valyrian steel and Noir mountain iron.
A fine sword.
At least it was to him at that moment. The mustachioed man collapsed forward. His chest split open, blood pouring out, ribs severed and unable to protect his heart. When the heart breaks, even a frog dies. So, the death of the fallen mustached man was inevitable. Unbeknownst to Enkrid, he was the last hope of the Greyhound. In essence, this moment marked the end of the Greyhound's history.
Ha.
Enkrid exhaled and shook the blood off his sword. The opponent had been conscious of his left hand. That's why he answered from the beginning. He had shown it for this moment. It was a technique of the Valen mercenary sword, a feint to implant an attack pattern in the opponent's mind, complicating their thoughts.
It works.
He realized he could maneuver his sword as intended. The satisfaction of achieving this was greater than the joy of victory.
It works.
That thrill filled his chest first. Using dual swords didn't have to be the main focus. He just needed to use the right tool at the right time.
Spears, other weapons, even shields.
He felt as if he could now reach for things he had previously given up on. Trying out all these different weapons wouldn't be bad. Although they might not fit his hands as perfectly as a sword, even experiencing them could be valuable. That's what he thought.
Not bad.
Enkrid muttered this as he finished off his opponent.
I don't know why, but watching the platoon leader fight always gets me excited.
Rem spoke, looking genuinely excited, grinning from ear to ear. The 3 opponents in chainmail remained unfazed, even at the death of the mustached man.
He wasn't supposed to die like that. That's a shame. He underestimated his opponent. You have to go all out against someone who fights with full power.
This was the exchange between the three soldiers in chainmail. So they do have some sense, Rem thought, nodding to himself. They were right. Enkrid had fought with all his strength, while the opponent held back, worrying about what came after. How could someone weaker than their opponent think about what happens after the fight? Dying was inevitable for them.
Hey, should we take them all at once?
Rem stepped forward.
You are too greedy, brother.
A hand large like a bear's landed on Rem's shoulder. It was Auden shaking his head.
Aren't you gonna move your hand?
Rem's words and gaze were as menacing as his excitement, yet Auden continued to laugh and shake his head.
I said, you're too greedy, barbaric brother.
You little...
Swish, thud. Rem's axe moved vertically and straightforwardly. Auden, despite his large size, stepped back. A cold tension settled between them. Auden's smiling face seemed to harden into a statue. The three soldiers in chainmail were baffled watching this. What's with these guys? Why are they fighting among themselves? Are they arguing about who gets to fight us? This was disrespect. It was mockery.
Crazy bastards.
Finally, one of the soldiers in chainmail stepped forward. He wielded a rounded warhammer. As he lunged forward, a sword blocked his path.
You're mine.
A blond man with red eyes, as if they held flames, said. His sword strike followed like a blazing flame. The man with the hammer swung a large, round shield like a weapon. It was both an attack and a defense. Ragnar's sword struck the shield, then quickly returned to its original position, like a swallow skimming the water.
Cutting in line, huh?
Seeing this, Rem charged forward.
If you break the order, the Lord will be angry, brother.
Auden also moved, and so the battle continued. What are these guys? Finn just blinked. She recalled a previous battle before coming to the battlefield, where she fought alongside Enkrid and someone from the border guard. Was it Torres or Toros? It had been intense, fierce. He had fought with all his strength, barely surviving.
Wouldn't it have been a breeze if these guys were there?
It seemed so. The three in chainmail armor were experts in combat. They all wielded blunt weapons. One had a hammer, another a morning star, and the last a long pole with a metal weight at the end. They were all tough opponents. Above all, despite their armor, they weren't slow.
If it were me.
She thought it would have been hard to handle even one of them. Their equipment was particularly challenging for Finn. Even if she managed to stab with a dagger up close, they would likely withstand it. Judging by the thick gambeson under their chainmail, she figured she'd have to stab at least halfway in with a short sword. Would there even be an opportunity? Assuming a gap appeared, what next? Would the one being stabbed just stand there and watch? They'd probably smash her head with a hammer or morning star. If her head got smashed, she'd die. She didn't feel confident at all. The friendly forces were toying with such formidable enemies.
Brother, it's time to go.
A fanatical soldier, more devout than most priests, approached the soldier wielding a morning star and closed the distance, then struck him on the head with a fist.
Didn't they say he's a master of Valaf-style martial arts?
He didn't look like it at all. The fanatic soldier simply overpowered the enemy with brute force. The morning star-wielding soldier swung his weapon as he was struck on the head, and it hit the fanatic's forearm. Despite not even wearing proper armor, the fanatic's arm seemed unscathed. They'd need to check later, but it appeared fine on the surface. Even with that sound, the fanatic soldier's body didn't waver. No usual groans of pain. He simply did what needed to be done.
Go to the Lord.
The opponent, struck in the head, staggered. Then, using his left foot as a pivot, the fanatic's torso rotated. A small whirlwind seemed to form around his large frame. Then, as he balanced his upper body with the rotation of his knees and hips, he kicked out, a high kick to the head. The moment the kick hit the soldier's head again, the struck soldier's eyes bulged out. Even though the kick landed on the helmet, the pressure from the impact was too much to withstand.
Wow, crap.
Finn couldn't close his gaping mouth. The other two were similar. A maniac with an axe yelled in anger, then burst into laughter.
What? You think wearing that means you won't die?
His opponent wielded a long pole with a metal weight at the end. As the metal-clad club came down, the axe-wielding Kansmal dodged the metal weight and reached out. catching the shaft below the head, then yanked it downwards, delivering a blow with his axe. It was frighteningly fast. The flying axe struck the enemy's abdomen. It was like the sound of a leather drum bursting. Kararak! The axe blade smashed through the chainmail. The chainmail at the waist shattered and broke, and blood splattered out. That wasn't the end of it. The crazed soldier spun his body in reverse, swinging the extended axe back into the same spot. The second axe strike split the broken chainmail even further, tearing more than half of the enemy soldier's side open.
Grr.
It was only natural that the enemy died. Pink intestines spilled out onto the ground, along with a gush of blood. The enemy fell to their knees and collapsed onto the ground. The soldier with blonde hair and red eyes, known for being lazy, looked more enthusiastic than ever. Twice he deflected a descending hammer with his sword, then thrust his blade. The motion was smooth, as if the sword naturally belonged in the enemy soldier's belly. The sword pierced halfway through the chainmail and tore into the enemy's cloth armor. As he forced the blade deeper, the enemy raised the hammer to strike down. From above, in a blind spot where it couldn't be seen, the hammer came down to crush his head. Just before the hammer hit, the seemingly lazy soldier released the sword embedded in the enemy's body and drew another sword from his belt. He struck upwards, deflecting the hammer. The movement was so quick and unhesitating that Finn couldn't see all the actions.
How well do these guys fight?
The deflected sword struck the enemy's helmet, not with the blade, but with the flat side. The struck soldier dropped the hammer, clutched his head, staggered, and lost his balance, falling over. The lazy-looking soldier walked over and stood before the fallen enemy. Then he pushed the sword already embedded in the enemy's abdomen even deeper.
Don't do it.
Crack, snap, squelch. There was something chilling about it. Fear surged, and Finn felt a shiver down her spine. The lazy soldier, who had pushed the sword through the enemy until it was embedded in the ground, straightened up. The soldier, now only holding a shield after losing his hammer, kept shaking his head and grabbing at the sword stuck in his body, crying as he died. While these three skilled enemies were swiftly dispatched, something else remarkable happened. Just when Finn thought he couldn't be more surprised, this was too shocking to ignore. Most of the observing soldiers had died. The cause was decapitation. The last enemy, moving unseen, had been going around beheading the dazed soldiers, not with a long sword, but with a single dagger.
When did he manage to do that?
With all this shock and confusion, Finn finally spoke up.
What are you guys?
Crass was right beside her, wide-eyed and speaking up.
Exactly.
Chryse was calming himself internally. Why was I so worried? They fought so well. The madman platoon fought several times better than he had expected. He had measured them against Enkrid, but they exceeded any expectations. A new question arose in his mind. How well do these so-called knights fight then? And he even felt admiration for the one who first assembled these soldiers into a unit.
No, the person who sent the platoon leader here is the real genius, that's it!
If left to their own devices, these people might have caused a massive explosion within the main force, but they had gathered around Enkrid.
Let's set the fire, squad leader Andrew.
Chryse said to Andrew, who was assigned as his escort.
Huh? What?
He was as shocked as Finn. He looked momentarily darkened, but then returned to normal, even seeming somewhat relieved.
Let's start the fire. If we stay here, the enemy's main force will come. Do you want to face them?
No, we can't do that. That's not an option.
Let's move!
Mac, Andrew, and Finn started striking flint. Among the supplies was a pile of hay meant for feeding the horses, perfectly dry straw for starting a fire.
Hurry!
Crace urged them. There was no need to ask why.
Shit, they're monsters. Spare me.
They didn't kill all the enemy soldiers. As soon as they were mostly routed, they stopped. There was no point in chasing them down. They couldn't kill them all anyway.
Leave them.
Enkrid made that decision even before Chryse could.
Understood.
Rem's response confirmed they were following Enkrid's orders. As the platoon members set the fire, Enkrid spoke up.
I feel like I have some sort of destiny with setting fires.
What kind of nonsense is this? Did he get hit on the head during the fight?
Pardon?
No, just saying, let's go.
The fire started in the traps the enemy had dug. With spring here, such a bonfire wasn't really necessary. It was just a fire, burning brightly. The flames rose, denouncing their presence. Enkrid and the mad platoon slipped away like the wind. As they were being led out, Finn said they only needed to move in a straight line now and joined Auden.
Hey, what was your name again?
It's Auden, sister.
Really? Could you teach me later?
Finn seemed to have developed a curious competitive spirit. Her eyes glanced over Auden's arm, noting again that there were no injuries. This had nothing to do with Valaf-style martial arts. Finn's eyes showed a mix of curiosity and competitiveness. Enkrid didn't care what the two were up to. Instead, he was focused on the ongoing training as they walked.
I couldn't quite grasp the sense of evasion. It's an issue of experience.
He had listened to Jackson and kept his words in mind.
You said you wanted to use 2 swords? Remember, only when they feel more comfortable than your own hands will they be truly useful.
Ragna also had a comment.
The first time you used the heart of the beast, that was well done.
Surprisingly, Rem had praised Enkrid's personal tactics. Was it impressive? Enkrid didn't really care.
Train well, brother. It all adds up in the end.
It was as Auden said, after glancing at Finn. Enkrid also believed that constant practice paid off. But there was still the matter of when they would stop traveling along this ridge. He thought it might be time to pull back. However, there were still people they needed to meet. As expected, 2 days after smashing through the enemy's trap with sheer force, they turned back towards the main force to evade the enemy's persistent pursuit. They had stopped to chew on some jerky for a break. An arrow landed among Enkrid's group. It was aimed directly at Rem's head, but Rem dodged with beast-like reflexes. He twisted his body to the side just in time. Although he didn't completely avoid it, resulting in a torn earlobe and some blood splattering in the air. Chewing on the jerky, Rem grinned.
An archer unit.
Lately, Rem seemed to be in a constantly good mood. Enkrid examined the arrow stuck in the ground. It was short and sturdy, different from before.
They've come prepared. There's no trace of them.
Ranger Finn spoke up. The archer unit, which had been harassing their rear, had returned to hunt the madman platoon. In other words, they were being tracked. Of course, this was part of the plan.
Are we good?
Finn asked. Enkrid nodded. This was all part of Kreis's plan, and Enkrid understood the situation. From the beginning, the purpose and objective of the madman platoon was clear. They were meant to distract and clean up. Now it was time for the cleanup. While the madman platoon was steadily whittling down the enemy forces, Marcus's main force headed towards Cross Guard. Could they really capture the city with this small force? It seemed unlikely. However, it was a cause for concern. Meanwhile, a guerrilla unit hit their rear, drawing attention away. Aspend didn't have many options, especially as a commander. His practical choices were limited.
But I will keep moving forward and unladen. Vanskulfus won't fault. We need to its reformance, even if only to prepare for the next battle. You need to clear out the remaining enemy forces in the detour route.
The commander's advisor spoke, and Aspend's commander deliberated. Several scenarios played out in his mind. Attack the city with just that small force? It wouldn't fall. But the fact that Crossguard was attacked would remain. It felt like a peculiar matter of pride. The failure of their plans involving giants and sorcery had put them in a tight spot. Would he go down as the commander who surrendered the principality's doorstep?
No, that can't happen.
Even if they didn't fall, the fact that they were attacked would remain. The stigma of being the commander who lost the city would stick. Could he bear that disgrace, or should he see this as an opportunity? To say he wasn't conflicted would be a lie, but his thoughts leaned in one direction. The principality had failed with their prepared plans. Narilia had dug in deeper and expanded its territory. If things stayed as they were, the borders between the two nations would change.
Can we just let this happen?
If they could wipe out the enemy forces on the detour route and withstand the remaining strength of Narilia's forces, if that happened, they might even have a chance to hit them from behind in the detour. Going to cross guard and leaving their position could be the worst possible move. Who knew what madman was commanding them? But gambling now. Why? They've already won this battlefield, haven't they? Then, could this be seen as an opportunity? By not holding the detour and pulling back, they had given space for their special units to move.
Sigh.
With a habitual breath through his teeth, The commander gave the order.
Deploy a fast-moving unit to the detour route.
The order came out with a hissing sound through the gap in his front teeth.
Yes, sir.
The Principality's forces moved quickly. However, the military aide felt a sense of foreboding.
If this goes wrong,
The consequences could be more than just shifting borders. The aide longed to see Avner, Aspen's greatest strategist, who at a young age had already made giants and others part of the military force,
it's a pity such a waste.
not being fully utilized because of his background. Of course, this was just idle thinking. In his eyes, Avner was a genius. He could take care of himself.
Send the knights.
If Norelia had the Red Cape Knights, the Principality had the Aspen Royal Knights. Aspen Royal Knights. The name might lack uniqueness, but their skill was undeniable.
Send 2, no 3.
Perhaps the commander felt the same sense of foreboding as his aide. The quality of the troops being sent to the detour route increased, and their numbers grew. If the archer unit, annoying pests harassing from behind, were dealt with and the rest, including 3 knights, advanced as planned. If the plan worked, it could be the decisive move that turns the tide.
Captain, do you know the difference between a sniper and a hunter?
Rem asked this right after dodging the arrow. According to Kreis's plan, their job was to deal with whoever was leading the archer unit, whether it was their claws, nails, or eyebrows. In this situation, a decoy was used to lure them in. For the decoy, Finn leaving appropriate traces was enough.
These guys are sharp. We need to be careful.
Finn commented. Meanwhile, Rem kept smiling. Seeing Rem, Enkrid asked blankly,
Do I need to know?
Not really, but I wanted to say it.
Rem could be overly honest at times. This was one of those times. He was always talkative.
A sniper shoots targets from a distance, while a hunter is someone who, as the name suggests, hunts.
So what's the difference?
Shooting arrows from a distance is fun, but hunting is even more exciting, especially axe hunting. It's the best.
And so what? Enkrid's eyes conveyed this question.
It means you should stay put and not get hit by any arrows while I'm gone. I'm going to take care of it.
Where to?
I'm going hunting. When you receive a gift, it's only polite to return it.
Rem said, pulling the arrow from the ground. He tucked the arrow into his belt and walked off into the woods. Should we just let him go? It should be fine. He wouldn't have gone if he wasn't confident. As for the rest,
Jackson.
the question implied whether Jackson had any interest in joining Rem to perform a coordinated ambush.
No, thank you.
That was firm. Fair enough. Rem would manage fine on his own. They decided to trust him.
As for us, we should do what we need to do, right?
Rem was the hunter, the archer unit was the prey, and then the madman platoon was the prey for the archer unit. Though summer might be more fitting, hunting could still be enjoyed in the spring, so it could be considered the hunting season.